In this session, we're going to go through the inventory control module as far as the setup procedures, some reports, some inquiries, and the manual movement and adjustments to inventory. The inventory module does also contain cycle counting and physical count procedures, but we will cover those in a secondary session. So let's start off by going into the inventory module, and we'll look at the data entry procedures first. The first two things we have to deal with are we have to build a control record to set up the defaults, and we have to turn on inventory locations. So let's look at the inventory control record first. And in this case, we've got a record that has a cost group and a cost method that must be defined before you can actually start entering any inventory or making any movements. The cost group allows us to have multiple cost methods. So we might have some inventory locations that belong to cost group 1 and other inventory locations that belong to cost group 2. And that allows you to either do one of two things, either to maintain a standard in one and average in another, or maintain two sets of standards for the same part number in two different locations. Those are very rare instances, but it is possible that you might want to do that. And so we've allowed that function. For the most part, 98% of the people are going to end up with one cost group and one cost method. The cost group can be any number you wish it to be. You enter it here and it defines that cost group. If you only have one cost group defined, wherever cost group is prompted, it will default to the one that's in this inventory control record, so you don't have to worry about entering it all the time. The cost method defines how you're going to cost the inventory in this location, and there are three basic methods for this. There's average costing, which is a rolling actual average. Very little setup, very little maintenance, other than timing is very important when it comes to average cost about the movement of inventory. Standard costing, which is a traditional standard where you set up and you roll up your bill of materials into material cost, you roll up your routing and your hours into labor cost with overheads and percentages and that kind of thing. And then you calculate a standard cost and you let that standard cost run for a period of time, and everything that moves then moves at the standard cost. If you buy it at a cost that's higher or lower than that standard cost, you'll just get a variance to standard, but that's called a purchase price variance. And then there's also lot costing, which is where if you're going to do lot control across all your inventory, you can set up lot costing, and the cost will actually be assigned to the lot number that's being carried in inventory for that part. So in that case, you could have the same part with multiple costs in inventory, but each lot will carry a unique cost, and we store it that way. I will say that average and standard are the two most common, and you'll work with your implementation team to decide whatever is the best for you. There are some adjustment accounts you can set up. And it's important to remember when you're in a procedure, if you don't know what it's asking you for, you can always double click or right click, and there's always a field help at a minimum. And it'll tell you information about what this account number is doing and where you need to set it up and why it's required. So those are always available to us. You can keep as many months of usage total as you like, and this is just for inquiry purposes. You might keep 20 years worth of inventory movement history, but only show usage on the last 36 to 60 months, something like that. And then you can base what's called an average usage, which is a calculated running average on the last 6 months, 12 months. Anything that makes sense to you for calculating an average usage. Usually 6 to 12 is a good number. If you go the whole 36 for your average, then you're going to be skewed by historical movements that may not be meaningful anymore. So use whatever makes sense to you. And this is adjustable at any time. Days of transactions history, when we get to the inventory inquiry and we're able to see the details of the transaction history, this just says how many days of transaction history do you want to see in that inquiry. Again, it is not a limit to the number of transactions you can keep in history. You can keep an unlimited number of transactions, but it's only what you want to see on the screen to just populate the data a little quicker, maybe, and then a conversion location. Now, the rest of this is all based on physical and cycle counts, and as I mentioned before, we'll cover that at a later time. So once you get the control record set up, There are a couple other screens. There is a bin control. Now, it's important to note that there are two types of bins in this system. There is bin control and there's reference bin. Bin control is where you would put in here the bins that are valid for you. And these are the limit. You will limit whatever people can use in bins by what's in this table. So some people will upload things into this table. Other people will just put in the bins. If they've got a handful of them, they'll put them in here. Again, work with your implementation team on the best way to populate this data. But bin control means every time you put inventory away and every time you pull inventory out, a bin number will be required so we know how to update the quantity on hand in that bin. The difference between that and reference bin is the same part goes in the same bin every time. So when you're looking for a part, you're looking for a bin, it's the same thing, but it makes it easier for people to look on the shop floor to look by bin number than by part number. So if you are lucky enough to have the same part and the same bin related all the time, that's great. But if you've got a situation where you got a big enough warehouse where the truck backs up and you just start putting stuff wherever you got room, then you're going to want bin control so you can go find those parts later. You know exactly where the units got put. So that's what bin control will set up. Bin.e will set up your reference bins, which is by part number. So you can set up all the reference bins you want. You can have other locations, like this part has 4 associated locations and none of them have reference bins. So that just means we're not tracking reference bins in those locations. Again, a reference bin is an optional field that is for information only. It doesn't do any controlling. And so once you get these control records set up, the next thing to set up would be the inventory locations. And you can define as many inventory locations as you want, and you can call them whatever you want, alphanumeric, whatever. If I list our current inventory locations, you can see I've got some that are numeric, maybe associated to a city. I've got others with things like adjust for the adjustment location, Amazon, Chicago. You can see that we've generated quite a few locations in this demo account, but you probably will have a handful of locations, maybe a finished good and a stock room, and maybe then a work in process, those kind of things. So again, you and your implementation consultant will work on defining the locations that you want. So if I were to pick, for instance, the finished good location, it comes up, I have a description of finished goods. I've assigned it to cost group 1. And if you remember that's associated to the average cost or standard, excuse me, I think we set up in the INB control. This type code defines whether this is a stocking unit of measure, inventory location or a non-stocking inventory location. SK means when you look at inventory, you'll be able to see a quantity on hand. All these other locations mean this is some kind of an adjustment or costing location. So when we move material into or out of these locations, quantities aren't adjusted, but dollars are. So that's the definition between the two. Anything that you want to see on-hand inventory for is an SK type location. And once I set that, it automatically sets this physical checkbox for visual reference. We can define whether or not we want to allow negatives to occur in this location. Some people want negatives to be allowed because they don't want the fact that the production people didn't complete a unit, but they still want to ship it. So they're going to ship it and then complete it later to offset the inventory. Other people want to stop that from occurring. So it's just up to you and your process as to whether you allow negatives. And then if you have lock control turn on, whether you allow negative locks. Again, this would normally be a very rare instance, but it is allowed. And this bin control defines whether or not this location is bin controlled. So when you turn bin control on, you turn it on for an entire location. So if I turn this on for finished goods, everything that moves into or out of finished goods will require a bin number. If I don't have this on, it will not require a bin number, and or I'm reference bin. So however you want to set that up. The account number is the general ledger account number that will get hit with the dollar. So if I pull material out of finished goods when I ship it, this is the account number that will get hit with the credit. If I issue material to this location, then this will get hit with the debit. So these dollars flow through to this account number through the inventory register file. And then there's a planning group. A planning group is, again, almost always just one. That means you have one manufacturing facility. If you have one manufacturing facility, say in California, another one in Florida, maybe they have two different planning groups, you have two different people managing it, you have two different MRP runs, you have two different sets of buyers and planners working with it. You can create multiple plan groups so that each planner sees only their inventory and their location. And then using planning basically says, do I want, for instance, the MRP process to see this inventory location as a valid inventory location? Now you think to yourself, why wouldn't I want that? Well, I might have a location that would be customer returns. So a customer sends me an RMA back and we put it in inventory, but we haven't inspected it yet. So you might not want that inventory location to be visible to MRP as usable inventory because you haven't inspected it yet. So in that case, for the RMA location, you might turn off using planning so it doesn't appear until it gets moved to finished goods after it's inspected. So you can see how that would come into play. The change history tab is just that. Anytime, and you'll see this prevalent throughout the system, anytime a transaction or a record is changed, we'll keep track of who did it, what date and time they did it, what text they put in, etc. So that's available for you, and that's automatic. You don't really have to do anything there. So now I've got all of my locations, my controls and things set up. Now I can get into my transaction processes. One of the first things we could talk about is an inventory requisition entry screen. And this would be a case where I would put in an inventory requisition. I don't know if I've got one here. And I'm going to load number one. So I've got an inventory requisition. It's by me. It's done today. When does it due? I can put that in or I can leave it blank for now. The status is open. And I've got a list of all the parts that I want to requisition and the quantities. And I want to move this inventory from finished goods into stock. So if this was something I was setting up, and this would more be like, say you're a distributor and you have multiple locations, you want to move from distribution warehouse 1 to distribution warehouse 2. You can set this up, get an inventory requisition screen, and move the inventory this way. So this doesn't do any moving itself. This sets up to be processed by an inventory transaction screen that I will show you in a few minutes. But all you do is put all your part numbers in, your quantities, and your from and your to loc. And the quantity moved will be updated automatically when the movement actually occurs later so we can see it. So all I would do would be to save this. It creates inventory requisition number 3, and I will show you the inventory requisition form and the process in a few minutes when we get to that screen. So again, this did not move any inventory. I don't have the ability to move it out of the screen, but I can reference this inventory requisition in a movement screen without having to re-enter all the part numbers again. So now I get into all the IT transactions. IT stands for inventory transaction, and everything that moves inventory in the Rover system creates an inventory transaction from one location to another location. So I'm going to open up IT.E, which is our simple inventory movement. It's an adjustment screen, and I'm going to move part number 110 and I'm going to move 3 of these. And again, you can look up the location if you don't know where you're moving it from, but obviously you would probably know it after using the system for a couple of days. You get the same lookups we had before. So I'm going to move it from stock, and I'm going to move it back to finished goods. Now, it didn't stop. Notice it didn't stop and ask me for work order or lot or bin, and that's because the location is not a work in process location, so it knows we're not associated to a work order. The location is not lot controlled, so it skipped the lot control field, and it's not bin controlled, so it skipped the bin number. But if I wanted to put in a reference bin, I could about where I put this if it was a different location than before. And now I can just put simple inventory adjustment. So I can put anything I want about this or why I did this in the notes, and I'll show you how you can look that up in a few minutes. So I would move this. That's all I have to do. I can hit save. And that creates an inventory transaction number 1485. You don't really have to worry about that number. It's just a sequence number in the IT file. That's it. It's moved. It's posted. If you want to move it back, you would create an offsetting entry and move from finished goods to stock for the 2 units. There's no undo of the 1485. It'll create a secondary transaction with the move back. So it's really a simple process. Now, if you've got multiple parts to move, now we've got IT.E2. And we can move groups of inventory transactions. I can enter part numbers here. This is the IT.E screen we just saw kind of on its side with multiple part numbers, so it lets you put in a bunch at one time. but it also gives you the ability to load a document. So I can load an inventory requisition, I can load a miscellaneous shipment, I can load a receipt, and I can load up shortages. For instance, if I just made a receipt and I received 10 parts to my receiving inspection location, and after I inspected it, I'm ready to move those onto my stock room, I can reference the receipt number here, and all 10 parts will show up here, and I can just save it, and it'll make 10 movements for me. And I don't have to go through the pain of entering that part number and the quantity and the locations 10 different times. So it makes it pretty simple. For instance, if I take this inventory requisition and I say I want to move inventory requisition number 3, you can see it loaded up all the results of that inventory requisition we entered, and it's set up to move from finished goods to stock, and the notes were inventory requisition 3. Now there's some warnings that are optional in the system. In this case, I've got it set to let me know my balance is going to go negative and asking me if that's okay. If I had that inventory location set not to allow negatives, it would stop me from saving. It might say, I'll try to save it and it'll come back and say, hey, you're going to go negative. That's not allowed. So it'll stop you at that point before it gets any further. So this is just another inventory transaction screen. And again, it's important to note, most inventory is moved automatically by the records that are moving them. Shipments move parts automatically. Work order pick lists issue parts to the work order automatically. Purchase order receipts receive parts in inventory automatically. The IT transactions are used to make any manual adjustments for things you need to do manually. Somebody scraps a part because it got damaged, somebody lost something, you have inventory shrinkage, whatever it may be, you're not doing it through the physical or the cycle count process, you can make adjustments with the inventory transaction screens. So I'll go ahead and quit this out. There are some others. There's a project inventory transaction. There's a convert inventory. This is basically what we call a work orderless inventory transaction screen. So you can take a list of components. Let me just open it real quick. You can put in an assembly at the top, and you can say 100% of these units are going to create 10 of these, and we can get it. We can have it load the bill of material for this part if I had one, and it would load the bill of material with all the quantities required. And when I save this record, it would adjust out all of the lower level components and would adjust in the upper level component. Basically, in a short method, what a work order does, but without the benefit of the work order and the labor and all the transactions. So not used very often because most people want the benefit of the work order and the traceability as opposed to just making a whole bunch of inventory adjustments, which is what this does. You could transfer between accounts because we might have different data accounts on the system. There's convert parts to lot control. So we'll cover a lot of these. If you wanted to look at lots, if you are lot controlled and you are interested in this, for instance, I think I got a lot number 3095, and it's for this part number. There is no unit cost. When it came in, there was no cost assigned. I could adjust it if I needed to. When it was created, when it expired, this must have had a 7-day expiration date, so got to get rid of it pretty quick in this case. If you want to put this lot on hold so it's not used by somebody, and it'll show you all the places where this lot lives right now. It's in stock for 700 units. I can see the sources, so I can see where this lot came from. This lot came from 2 inventory transaction entry screens where we made an adjustment to create these lots. And the destinations are where this lot went. This lot went into these 3 work orders. So this is kind of how the lot tracking system works. They keep a lot record with a source and a destination for each level, and we can run multi-level reports that'll roll up all the way from the top end, which part got sold to the customer, and a problem was reported. We could trace all the way back to all the components and the lots that went into that main lot in the first place. And then lots used by and lots used using. So this again is all part of the lot traceability purpose. So if you're not lot controlled, this doesn't mean a lot to you. If you are lot controlled, this is kind of your bread and butter. So now if I look at the reports and inquiries, I'll go through a few of them here. There's an allocation reports and barcode labels if you want to print labels, commitment reports, cycle count reports. The 2 main inquiries are inventory inquiry and the inventory availability. So inventory inquiry is by part number. Remember, I can look up by part number, and I can look up by any one of these other codes by just right-clicking in the part number field, or I can type in part of the part number and hit enter and find that part number. So what this will show me is it will show me my current standard cost. It'll show me my current average cost. If I'm tracking either one of these, it'll show those. This will show me my stocking unit of measure, my average monthly usage. So this is based on the last, if we remember the inventory control screen we saw, this is based on the last 6 months of average usage. My description for the part, it can't be changed here, but it's displayed for reference. And then all the locations that currently have activity for this part number. And again, scroll bar off to the right, if you remember, means you have an unlimited number of options, so you can have an unlimited number of locations. Generally, you don't have all that many for any one part. Otherwise, it's spread all over the place. So I've got finished goods, inspection, receiving inspection, and stockroom. And down here, you may remember in bin.e, I had a reference bin A13, so it's showing it to me here. I don't see the quantity for that bin because I'm not bin controlled. I'm only using reference bin. If I was using bin control, I would see the quantity in that lot, and I would see how many of those are pre-allocated to something already. So those are all pretty nice features if you need them. Now, across the top, I've got additional tabs. So like these commitments, if I want to see what those commitments are made up of, I can scroll down or hit here and I can see an unlimited number of commitments. I've got 2 sales orders, the date they're supposed to be delivered, the quantities, the type, which is SO in this case, the sales order number, the customer number they're going to, and the location they're getting pulled from. If I want to see incoming or on order, I can see I've got 2 work orders. Now this is a make part, so I'm seeing work orders as incoming material for these. If this was a buy part, and this was something I was buying on a purchase order, this type would say PO, this record ID would be the purchase order number, and this name would be the vendor number they're coming in from, and the date is the date I expect to receive it, either off the work order or the purchase order. Usage history will show me just a graphic representation of all the months and years that I keep in inventory. And again, you can keep as many as you'd like. You can see a chart for the last 12 months. You can see a chart for the last 6 months. You can see a 24 months. So that's just, eye candy, kind of fun to play with. The lot information, this is not a lot controlled part, but if it was, I would see all the lots that I currently have in inventory and where they are and how many are on hand, allocated and available, and even down to which bin each lot is in if I want to find a lot in a bin. The last thing here is the transactions tab. I mentioned that everything that moves inventory creates an inventory transaction, and those transactions are shown underneath each part number. So in this case, on 5/12, which was today, I did an IT.E from stock to finished goods for 3 units, and that's the transaction we just did. So I can right click anywhere along this location and I can see the transaction details, and I can see all the information, the procedure that made it, the cost. I can see the user ID of the person that did it, and I can see any notes that that person put in about why they did this. So you may remember I just typed that in so we'd have something to see. Important to note, each transaction carries a before and after image, not normally shown, but we do show it in the detail, so that if you had a question like, how did I get to the quantity I'm at? How did I get to 51? You can see that I started with 48. I received these 3, and now I got 51. So you get a quick visible reference for how you got to where you are right now. Okay, so that's transactions. This is part by part. The other inquiry that's pretty handy is inventory availability. And this isn't so much looking up a single part, but finding something that matches a set of specifications or a set of rules. So specifications were defined in the engineering module in the part master, and they can be whatever you want them to be. They can be amps, voltage, size, length, width, color. So if I said I want to find a bolt pattern 52 wheel, and I want to see all of them, I can just enter that and hit display, and it will show me every wheel I got that fits a bolt pattern 52. So I've got quite a few of them. Now, if I say, yeah, well, that's nice, but they wanted a chrome finish. So I could come down, or let's say a one-piece wheel. Well, just since that appeared here, I want a one-piece wheel that's a bolt pattern 52, and I hit display. It more limits my search. So my search becomes more limiting. So the more I put in, the more limiting my search becomes, and I can find not only the part that they're looking for, but maybe, hey, I don't have the one you asked about, but I do have this one. So it'll give you a little ability to cross-sell and upsell if you need to, looking things by specification. Okay. There are a series of reports. The inventory R1 report is the recommended report for doing your costing report. This will cost your inventory by either everything or by location or by category. And this is the report you would normally use to balance your inventory value to your general ledger if you want to check that at the end of the month. Another handy report, component availability with on-order data. That's the same as the INVR2, but a new one was created and shows on-order data. So I'm not sure why anybody use R2, but R4 does the same thing and gives you additional data. So if I look at INVR4 and I say, I want to see if I have enough parts to make something. So I can say, that's what I want. I want to make 100 of them, and I want to make it right now. So inventory balance. So based on my current inventory balance, do I have enough of all the lower level components to build this part? So I can hit this and I can run process, and it comes up and it says, okay, well, you've got enough aluminum, you're not short, but you don't have any caps, you don't have any logos, and you don't have any boxes. So you're short those units. The other thing you can do then, and it shows you if you have them, like I'm short these, but I've got units coming in. I don't have enough, so you need to go to purchasing and say, hey, you need to buy things. Or MRP is going to tell, if you place an order, MRP would obviously tell you to order these parts. But this would be even before you have an order in. This doesn't have anything to do with a work order, a purchase order, a sales order. The customer just called and said, hey, do you have enough units to assemble this? And you can find out right away if you do without having to go through the whole order process. So it's a nice, quick, handy inventory check. There's some other, you will just go through all these and find the reports that you like. Inventory requisition form. I think if this is kind of a plain paper form for that inventory requisition, if I pick this and say preview on screen and look at record number 3, which is the one we entered, I can run the process, and it's just a simple plain paper. It's not a logo because it's an internal document. Don't need to burn up a lot of nice paper or nice logos. So it shows you the parts, all the parts that are on that list. And in case you want to send something along as a kind of an internal picking or packing list, this gives you the ability to do that. All right, and then there are inventory transaction screens. You can run inventory transactions by date range, by part number, by location, by work order. So if you want to see everything that went into or out of a work order, you can run this report, etc. So these are handy reports, including these usage reports. There's a slow moving inventory report where you can see I got inventory that hasn't moved in 12 months. Maybe I need to obsolete it or try to put it on sale, whatever it might be. Usage and projected months of stock by part, and then 12 months usage by part number. So there's a usage file that is built, and if you remember back to the inventory control screen, we set that up at 36, so we're capturing 36 months of history. You could set it up at 36, you could set it up at 60, you could set up 120. It doesn't really matter. It's just how much data you want to see when you go to these things. So this is the inventory control module. There's very little that you need to do as far as processes, but the regenerate allocations and regenerate commitments are primarily there when we import data from somebody else's system. We need a way to update the allocations and the commitment files with the data. So we'll run these procedures. After that, they're all updated online as we go through. So there's not much. And there's assignments of ABC codes and assign ABC codes, and assigning the cycle dates that we'll get to when we do the cycle count processes. So that is the inventory control module for now. I wish you well with your implementation, and thank you very much.